Good evening, everybody. It's 7 o'clock on Monday, December 16th, 2024, and we will call this meeting of the Sault Ste. Marie City Commission to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Gary,
Here.
Commissioner Bauer,
Here.
Commissioner Baspis Rath,
Here.
Commissioner Habusta,
Here.
Commissioner Marble,
Here.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Here.
Commissioner Talentino.
Here. All are present and accounted for. If everybody that can stand, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Now, item 4 is mayor comments and general announcements. Just like to give a thank you again to Lake Superior State University for hosting us at our last meeting. We all had a good time and a good audience, and that's a great venue to have a meeting, and look for us there next year around the same time. So we have nothing under item B, proclamations and recognitions. So we'll move into item C, which is public comment. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to make any comments on any of our scheduled agenda items? Seeing none, we'll move right along into item D, which is the consent agenda. Deputy City Manager Robin Troyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Under the consent agenda, item 1, approval of the City Commission meeting minutes of December 2nd, 2024. Item 2 is approval of the special City Commission meeting minutes of December 2nd, 2024. Item 3 is acceptance of the Planning Commission meeting minutes of July 25th and December 5th. Item 4 is acceptance of the Tax Board of Review meeting minutes of December 10th. Item 5 is acceptance of the Zoning Board of Appeals meeting minutes of June 20th. Item 6 is reappointment of Fred Smith, Bob Shalop, and Jim Cloudman to the Airport Advisory Board for a term to expire January 1, 2029. Item 7 is consideration of the 2025 part-time seasonal wage schedule. Item 8 is consideration of a resolution to exempt the city from the provisions of Public Act 152 of 2011. Item 9 is consideration of 2025 annual guideline resolution for poverty exemption. Item 10 is consideration of an easement to Cloverland Electric Cooperative for electrical service to automated comfort controls, Meridian Street Building. Item 11 is consideration of updated user fees for the Sioux Seal Recreation Area. Item 12 is consideration of Smart Zone lease agreement with Gatehouse Media Michigan Holdings, Inc. Item 13 is consideration of 2% funding and bid or budget amendment for Great Lakes Recovery Center and the Sioux Area Arts Council. And item 14 is approval of the consent agenda items as presented.
Thank you, Deputy City Manager. Would any commissioner like any of these items further explained or removed for individual consideration? Seeing none, Commissioner Bauer.
So moved, we approve tonight's consent agenda.
It's been moved and supported. Any questions, comments? All in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. So we'll be moving right into item F, which is communications. City Manager Chapman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. So up first for commission is just a discussion regarding some of the proposed utility projects that we've been talking about. The commission recall we were trying to get a workshop together, but we couldn't seem to make the schedules align for everybody. And this meeting was supposed to be light, so I apologize for that. But this is a good opportunity to have these kind of discussions. So just as a refresher, kind of where we've been, where we've been going, and where we want to go. About a year or so ago, the commission approved some borrowing for some treatment or for some upgrades to the wastewater treatment plant and the Peck and Eureka area. During that process, the bids came back for the wastewater treatment plant. They're a little bit higher, so we had to push some of that stuff off. And then we had to break up some of the projects. So we've got all that underway. With that, there was another capital improvement bond for the water side to replace some of the water lines in that area. And now we're moving on to kind of the next steps here. So when we originally brought this to the commission, we showed you where we were at with the approved borrowing, what we'd be proposing for this year's borrowing, and then a possible for third-year borrowing. So these borrowings that we have on for the agenda tonight are just for this next year moving. The third year borrowing is kind of proposed. If the commission wants to go in a different direction on those ones, we can cater to that. But, so as we've discussed it before, we showed you where the projects were. We kind of showed you the phases and the plant, what we were anticipating in terms of water work with the, some of the looping projects, the lead replacement projects, as well as the, water intake protection and the Riverside Drive water main replacement. So kind of the big question that the commission had at one point was, what do the rates look like with all this borrowing? So we've got some rate structures here for you all to review. If you want to push that down, and I will throw it up on my screen. Kelly, you want to share my screen for me, please? I don't know what we need here. Ba-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. So we have the proposed rate structure that would be kind of starting out 6/30/2025, going out to 6/30/2034. This particular analysis assumes a couple different things. There's a 2% annual increase in expenditures, a little bit of water loss like we've seen, and then the debt that would be what we've approved, what's fallen off moving forward, and then the borrowing that we're proposing for approval tonight, and then the borrowing for the next year. So a lot of numbers in there, but if you kind of jump down to the bottom there, the way we typically show you the rates during the budget process is we show you the typical bill for the household at 5,000 gallons. So the top part right up here in the first blue line is actually what the bill would be, and then the subsequent section with the percent increases is what we would anticipate the rates to need to increase to cover the debt kind of moving forward. And again, this assumes a little bit increase in our expenditures for operations, but this would carry us forward with the borrowing. So it's not a huge increase year to year. The cumulative, I understand we were saying if there's some concerns there, but essentially we're kind of making this work by having a little bit less cash available for our routine maintenance activities in exchange for all these capital projects. So 5,000 gallon user, we're anticipating seeing about 2.9%, 2.09%, 3.28, 3.32, 3% kind of moving across there. So, and again, this is going to the projects that we've got kind of slated for funding. Next year's is lead service line replacements, Riverside Drive water main replacement, water intake protection, the downtown Island Bridge and underground crossings, and the Ryan Avenue looping and water main projects. That's in the proposed borrowing for the drinking water side, and within the clean water or the wastewater side of things, we have a couple of this past year's, we have the CSO project for Peck and Meridian. We have slated for 25 and 26 some lining of some sanitary mains along the power canal, and then projects within the plants to replace our disinfection, solids handling, primarily being digester upgrades. That's year 3, and then year 2, our primary treatment, biological contactors, disinfection, solids handling, dewatering, electrical, and heating. So to kind of give you the bigger picture on why we're doing these projects, we got to remind you, our NPDES permit for the wastewater treatment plant has certain requirements and certain projects that we have to accomplish 5 years ago. But we're trying to catch up on a lot of those things. So in the NPDES permit, there are certain projects in there that are known as the CSOs. The City's been tackling those since the early 90s. We're at the tail end of that. We've got a couple of other CSO projects that we're working on outside of the Peck and Meridian area, or Peck and Eureka area. Right now, they're set up to be funded through the Army Corps of Engineers, through a grant program with them. We're hoping that those two CSO projects are big enough and have enough impact that it's going to help the system collect the water and move it to the plant, and then with these upgrades to the plant, be able to handle it, process, treat it without having any bypasses. So the commission will recall just about a month or so ago, maybe month and a half ago, and then subsequent springs and subsequent falls, when we have a decent amount of rain that's sustained coming in, our system gets bottlenecked at the wastewater treatment plant and it bypasses. So essentially, we're skipping part of our treatment process and sending partially treated water out into the river. And it's not necessarily that the water hasn't been treated. We dose the heck out of it, out of bleach, so it's got a little bit higher concentration there. That's not the best for the river, but we're still treating it. It's still good to go into the river. But every time we have one of those bypass events, it's a notice that we have to send to Eagle. It's kind of another mark on our NPDES permit, since we're not supposed to be doing those anymore. So there's a couple of big picture things in there. These are the projects that we've identified as getting us out of the requirements for our NPDES permit, the system improvements, the treatment plant improvements, and on the water side, because the water doesn't fit within our NPDES permit, those are kind of the burning projects that we've identified in the water system that we feel we need to tackle. So, for example, the road over on the east side, Riverside, thank you, Riverside. That's been an issue for a long time. There's no pressure in there, there's quality issues, there's fire suppression issues. Right now, we have an automatic mutual aid on that area of the city. If there was to be a house fire, we wouldn't be able to draw off of the fire hydrants. We would have to call in mutual aid and then try to extinguish it that way. The other ones are, there's one big project that's kind of a have to do. We have to replace out the lead connections that we talked about during the last meeting. And then the other projects are things that we should be doing to the system, looping them to ensure the water's moving around, the quality's not deteriorating from stagnation, protecting the intake since we only have one intake with the city. We don't want to have a catastrophic failure there because then we don't have any water in the city. So these are kind of priority projects. On the wastewater treatment side, the commission will recall we did have Donahue go through it at a certain point. They proposed a couple of different options, but as we looked through them, the cost for some of the newer treatment processes exceeded what just replacing our existing system is. So we have our plan for the wastewater treatment plant. A lot of it is out with the old equipment and replacing it with new equipment. So there's not a lot of changes to the processes. It'll kind of get us where we need to go. So again, so we've got one big borrowing kind of under our belt that's moving forward. This year for this item, we're looking at proposing the borrowing for the wastewater treatment plant, as well as the water side, the DW and the CWSRF, and then possibly looking at year 3, which isn't approved tonight. The commission will still have to take action on year 3 when that item comes down. So on the year 3, if there's some more direction that the commission would like to give on that one, then we would be open to take that. So I know that was kind of a, I don't know, a lot, maybe not enough, I'm not sure, but be happy to take any questions.
I got a couple questions just real quick. You gotta kind of dumb it down for me here. So the first application that we had from 20, is it 23 or 24?
We'll call it 23.
23 was 35 million, 17.5 of forgivable and 17.5 of loan.
Correct.
And so that is for improvements to the water, or the sewage treatment plant.
And,
Now, yeah, go ahead.
and Peck and Meridian.
Right. So Will those improvements take care of the problems that we have for our NPDES permits?
Not all of them.
Okay, but substantially?
It takes care of come on up here, Brian, and Dave, if you guys want to kind of explain that.
It takes care of the Peck and Meridian area. As you remember, what was it, 2001?
Quite a
Had
while
a
ago.
big storm and that area flooded out and there was numerous houses so it'll address that area. And that's one of the remaining 4 that's in our NPDES permit.
And then, so there are 4, one of them's being taken care of by the Corps?
Yep. And we really only have plans to do those 2. So there are 4, there's 2.
Okay.
Our NPDS permit, so to get out of all those requirements, we're gonna have to do a study at a certain point that's gonna show, it's gonna be a computer model, that our system can handle a 100-year, 24-hour event, rain event. And Dave could probably explain to you more better than I can how much water that actually is, but that's kind of the threshold. So we have to do these improvements so that they can build in the improvements into the model and show that we can handle the storms. And if we can handle the storms in the model, you know, barring any kind of climate change conversations, we should be able to handle those storms when they actually come in. So if you recall, you know, before a lot of the improvements that we've done, sanitary and stormwater were one pipe. That's how most, if not all, cities were built at one point. But with the increase in storms or the increase in severity of storms, when they get inundated with all that clean water, especially when they get bottlenecked at the plant, there's only one place for the water to go, and that's backwards in the system. The commission may recall, I know 2001 Masterson spoke of that, but even 2022, Robin, was that when the big one we had again on Peck and Meridian? It was about 2022, the spring of 2022. We had a big storm event come in about June of that summer, and it inundated it, and it backed up into a good portion of that neighborhood. So by increasing the capacity, taking out the clear water from the sanitary system, we won't have those sanitary backups into people's basements. So our bet is on those 2. So the CSO at Peck and Meridian, that's covered under the bond that we approved last year. The Army Corps of Engineers is working on the other CSO, which is Water Street. The actual work will kind of be there, going up into downtown a little bit. That involves some separation as well as some capacity building in that area. And then again, being able to show that the plant can handle the water, treat the water that's coming in, not have these bypass events. We can get out from under our NPDS. We can close out what we've been doing since the early 90s. Some of the projects within the wastewater treatment plant are also projects that we just need to do. The plant itself, last major upgrade was 1986-ish, somewhere around there. A lot of those components are just old, outdated, they're breaking. Director Masterson has been phenomenal at finding replacement parts for them when they do break. But eventually, whatever source on eBay that he's going for from parts from 1980s isn't gonna be there anymore. A lot of them aren't there anymore. So I mean, we have pumps, when the pumps break, we could retrofit, but they're not working anymore. So we have to replace those pumps. So I mean, it's not anything that the staff has done. It's nothing that the commission on this dais or even previous days have done. It's just the fact that our infrastructure, the wastewater treatment plant, has just aged out. I mean, that's what happens. And I can't speak, obviously, too much before my time, but I know the staff that we have all across the utilities have been very responsible in managing the utilities and trying to get them up to snuff to be able to do what we can do. But at a certain point, that maintenance activities just need to replace with capital. Otherwise, it's just like a vehicle. It's gonna nickel and dime you to death, and you're gonna be spending the money anyways, and you could have just replaced it, so. That's probably a really long answer to your.
That was building. Okay, so the second phase, then we're looking at improvements to the, other improvements to the wastewater treatment plant and then the collection system, and that's what, $28 million?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, and then there's
but
another one for $17 million, or is that part of the same?
That's the drinking water. Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Yes. So last year, we approved one big borrowing through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We tacked on a revenue bond to do the water side of it.
Yep.
This proposal that you have in front of you for tonight has another borrowing from the DWSRF for the drinking water projects, the Riverside, the Protection Inlet, the lead and copper removal, as well as CWSRF, the clean water side, for some further improvements to the plant and then lining. And then our year 3 would primarily be clean water, wastewater treatment plant stuff. And in the analysis that we did, we didn't know if SRF would be available or not. So we went with basically a market bond. So your interest rates are gonna be a little bit higher compared to SRF. There's no principal forgiveness or anything like that. So it's kind of a worst case in terms of bonding. Maybe we can get back in SRF. We think we can, but we don't know for certain. We were surprised that there was even principal forgiveness for this round that we're trying to get into. We would be surprised if it's available next year. So we're not even gonna pretend like it's an option for next year. But last year, we got a good amount of principal forgiveness, about half of it. This year, on both DW and CW, there's some principal forgiveness, which was a surprise because there was some money left over. Next year, it's not gonna be there, unless the feds come up with something, another reduction of something or build back something, and starts infusing all of these funds with more money. We're not anticipating that.
Okay. So we're talking 80 million then, total creep from the original $35 million budget.
Yeah.
So are these,
Plus 45.
now you mentioned it was capital improvement bond, I think you and I had this discussion, do these count against our borrowing capacity? Or are they considered revenue bonds that are,
They would be revenue bonds, so they do
All-
not,
all of them?
all of them except for the 2.9 million that we're looking at for last year, that you approved last year. For the Peck and Meridian ineligible portion, everything else we're looking at is revenue bonds. So yes, they would not count against our amount, total amount available. And then we just learned today that next year, we may qualify for a 40-year amortization instead of 30, which would make the repayment look a little bit better. Of course, we'd pay more interest, but it would spread it out over a longer period of time and not impact the ratepayers as much.
And so on this schedule then, is the first borrowing is already baked into all of the rates, and then
Correct.
these are the complete borrowings, 100%?
Yes, we have shown you and color-coded them, if we're looking at the same thing. The one that we approved in the fall of 2024 is up on top. But the color-coded rows that are green and yellow, those are the ones we're talking about tonight. The darker green is the one that you approved in the fall. The lighter green are the two that we're talking about now. And the yellow row, I'm sorry, it's on the other,
You're on the other one, yeah,
I think Don was referring to the debt service coverage
One up on
ratio.
yes. The
Okay.
rates.
The yellow row is the 2026 that we're not sure about yet, but it's put in there just to give you the worst-case scenario.
So the sheet we gave you last time was this bigger one that has all that information. And you can see they're all kind of baked in. We reprinted it off for you if you wanted another copy of it tonight, because I know it was hard to see on the schedule there. But you'll see on that one kind of midway down under existing debt service, where we're at with existing debt, where it's gonna fall off, moving to the right. And then just under that, there's a dark green, light green, and a yellow, and that lists out the other bondings that we've had.
So here's a question that I have is, kind of my overall problem, is in July of 2024, when we approved the bid awards for the Myron bid and everything else, in the commentary and the fiscal impact, it says this 5-year plan will cost approximately $36.1 million. I didn't know it would balloon to 80, but, and it talks about the current water and sewer debt is continuing to mature and payments are dropping off each year. By fiscal year 2025, annual debt obligations related to water and sewer will be over $1 million lower than what was paid for the fiscal year ending 6/30/23. With that being said, we anticipate the annual payments for this debt will be a replacement of the current debt that is maturing, so there will be little or no impact on water rates, not considering annual increases to general operating costs, which could still result in annual rate increases. And so that's in regard to the bond that is baked into this already. Correct? The one from
that's
July.
approved.
Yeah.
Yes, the one that's approved.
So, and then, so it says, the Eagles CW SRF funding was split in half, with 17.5 coming from an ARPA grant, and the same amount coming from a 2% loan. In the current economic market, this is a very generous borrowing rate. Without this grant and loan, the city would not be able to afford the needed upgrades, close remaining CSOs, and complete current outstanding state mandates. Now, I have a hard time jumping from not being able to afford upgrades to this 36 million. Now we're looking at $80 million worth of debt. I have a hard time jumping between 36 million, just being able to afford it because of the grants, and $80 million in total debt. But that's my questions. Anybody else have any? Commissioner Rubenstein?
Yeah, can you just clarify what the rate increases have been, I guess, the previous 5 years? Like, is what we're seeing in line with, I'm pretty sure it is, I just, off the top of my head, can't.
It's close. I mean, I think early in my time here, there was some increases that we had to do. We went up probably about 5%, 7% at one point. Let me see if I can pull it up. We got that in this, is that in the secure finance folder?
The sewer and water rates spreadsheet. I know that we've had as low as 2% rate increases. I know we had one year that was quite high. I can't remember if it was your first year here. There was one year that was around 9 or 10%. Oh, thanks. So 2021, 3%, 2022, 4.6. This is the fiscal year end. 2023, 10. That was the year that was the big bump that Brian referred to. 2.2% in 2024 and 2% in 2025. Projecting ahead. So when I said about not being able to borrow, there's a huge differential in the rate of borrowing for the SRF and the principal forgiveness and the grants that we got, and just borrowing it all with the capital improvement bond. We were looking at recently the capital improvement bond being a rate of 4.6%. And, you know, if you've looked at rates and how they've increased lately, 2% is incredible. It does make it more manageable for us to borrow that money when we have that kind of incentive. It is very difficult to borrow that money at 4.6%. So when we were looking at affordability back a year ago, I also did not anticipate having this kind of debt load. So I wasn't sure until I pulled the numbers together, the affordability of it. But when I put it together and looked at the debt dropping off and looked at the revenue over expenditures when I projected it out, which was a good question. I'm glad that you asked about the impact on the water customers and the rates. When we put it all together, it does look manageable, and it has been reviewed by our bond advisors as well. And so surprising that we have that capacity, but all of it being revenue bonds also was helpful with it being from the revolving fund.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
And so a year from now, basically, if we were uncomfortable where things were heading, we could go a different direction on that last phase of it, correct?
Yes. Year 3, well, we would look for direction. I mean, if you don't wanna give a direction tonight, then we can follow up with it later on, but, yeah, year 3, tonight's approval doesn't do year 3. So we would still have to bring back, any kind of notice of intents or applications or contracts or what have you, depending on whatever direction we're going. If SRF from either source is available, or if we go to the market, whatever the case may be, those actions still need to be approved by the commission at those times and are not subject to like a carryover approval tonight.
And that, what was it? Just clarify that last phase, what that amount would be again?
17 million. Ish.
Let's see. Oh, I lost my report. Hold on.
I think the last phase, Brian, was estimated at 35 million.
Yeah, yes. So it was 17, last year the loans for fiscal year 24 from CW was 17.5, but we got 17.5 in principal, so 17.5. This year, it's 25 and 13 between the two sources, with some principal forgiveness, and then next year, fiscal 26 would be the 34.
So for me, you know, we have a pretty significant stopgap, I guess, if we feel like we need to go a different direction a year from now. And I just feel like longer term, we're exposing ourselves and potentially putting ourselves in a worse spot if we don't move forward.
And on the DW side of things, the drinking water side of things, completely different from the clean water side of things. We've always been interested in DW, but the city's never scored high enough. So, we actually managed to score decent in those rounds, which made us eligible for the funding now, which isn't necessarily a good thing because it usually means your infrastructure is not the best. But, you know, part of this is us being ready for when opportunities do come forward. The DW side of things was an opportunity that came forward. So it wasn't necessarily something that we were 100% planning on. It was something that we were looking for. We've been trying the last 4 years to get different funding for Riverside. We sought grants through the state, the federal government. We've even tried partnering with the Sioux Tribe to try to use them as some leverage, get some funding. None of that worked. So really, the only way to fix Riverside at this point is to do some form of borrowing. With the DW side of things, there's some principal forgiveness, there's an opportunity there. But when we first started talking about some of this stuff too, the DW really wasn't part of the bigger picture at that time. The opportunity came up, we're asking for permission to take advantage of it, get out those kind of important projects that we have kind of burning out there, and then move forward from it.
So my math was wrong, it's 107 million in projects. Commissioner Hubusta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I appreciate your comments. I have some additional questions regarding the process. First of all, one of the things that was just said is that we're changing parts, not processes. If our parts were based off of 1950s, 1970s technology, wouldn't it be better to update processes? I think about communities like Flushing, which is installed a new bio-solid tank and now is saving the city about $100,000 per year in revenue. I think about our down the road in Marquette, who now can handle new biosolids handling and is taking in income from other communities to handle biosolids from them. So I guess my question is, why would we not use this to also update processes as well?
So our wastewater treatment plant relies on gravity. So let's say we went with a different secondary or biological process. We would have to pump it somehow then, and that would get extremely expensive. The projects we're talking about that you already approved in tonight, don't even touch on the biosolid stuff yet. That would be the additional 35 million. So I feel like if we changed our process now, it would cost us 3 times as much.
Thank you. I appreciate that answer. Additional questions I had involved, can you also just explain to me what other avenues for funding we've sought for this? I know that the city has worked hard with the My Water Navigator and now My Funding Hub, but federal request, state request, SAW grants, other grants, what other opportunities have we sought to seek funding for this?
So there aren't a lot of funding opportunities for grants in terms of actual work to be done in the system or at the wastewater treatment plant, or even the drinking water plant or the water filtration plant. There are a lot of grants that help you figure out where to go or to analyze where you want to go. For example, the SAW grant. SAW grant was an opportunity for communities to jump into a pot of money, hire a consultant, come in, record all the pipes, do all this analysis to help you figure out a plan moving forward so you can do your capital projects. To a certain extent, that's actually where some of the stuff came from. The city went through the SAW grant process and wrapped it up 19-ish, somebody, Dave, Kristen, somewhere around there, 19-ish. And that was supposed to get you ready to move forward on these projects. So there's a lot of grants for analysis, there's a lot of grants for planning, but when it comes to actual concrete, digging out, replacing things, there's not a lot of grants. We've been fortunate that Dave and his staff have found a couple of grant sources through the Army Corps of Engineers. We really weren't made aware of those programs until a couple of years ago. I think maybe we went to a webinar or went to a training, or one of our counterparts from them kind of told us about the program, but there weren't a whole lot. But on the drinking water side of things, like I said, we've been through every kind of grant that would somewhat be eligible. But when it comes to sort of a lot of these projects, especially at the federal level, you have to be disadvantaged. There's a lot of other scoring mechanics that we couldn't quite meet. There's some social things in there that just didn't quite align with us. So really the only reliable source of funding is revenue borrowing, either on the market or through CW or DW SRF programs. Now, I think we've shown that if there's a grant out there, our staff will hound it down, smell it out, and apply for it. But the reality is there's just not a lot of direct grant opportunities for these ones. A lot of these programs have turned into a loan program, a revolving loan program, so that the funding is somewhat kind of always available until it's all tied up on borrowings. But there's just not a lot of grants for these type of things.
Thank you. And just to follow up, I think one of the things that is hard for me is to, when we're talking about, and Don just gave the number, in the hundreds of millions of dollars, I don't know what exactly we're getting for that. Are we getting a Chevy? Are we getting a Yugo? Are we getting a Rolls Royce? I want to know, are we living within our community needs with this plan? Is it what our community needs? Are we going above and beyond? Help me understand that a little bit better.
I'm not a truck person, and I'm not trying to start a truck debate here. But the borrowing we're doing, the work we're doing, you are going to get a reliable Chevy 1500, maybe 4-door. It's not a Cadillac. It's not a used vehicle. It's what we need to get the job done so that our system is reliable and can carry the community forward.
Thank you.
Anybody else have any questions or comments? I just have a couple more comments, if I could. I want you to know that I'm not opposed to it, and I know we've deferred maintenance on a lot of our facilities for a long time, and part of that is because we had to encumber the city for all the CSO projects. We've got tens of millions of dollars worth of projects that we did there, and I'm sure there's a lot of deferred maintenance, but this just seems like a really big project, really fast. $107 million, I guess my fear is that something else within the city breaks, and then and I know that they're different funds, but the water plant has different issues, and I know we were looking and talking about projects at the water plant. This just seems to be, I don't know, taking everything into consideration at once. But back to the water rates. So water rates are driven by use and some other factors. Obviously, the debt will be the factor and everything else. What happens if these assumptions change and the water use goes down? Then the rates are gonna go up much higher. And we're gonna have to cover the debt any which way we cut it. So it's gonna be on the backs of all the water users. And you have in here 2% projected annual increase in expenses. That's expenses, that's not the increase that's attributable to the debt. That's on top of that. What if the expenses go up 5%? You know, then we've got, in the first year, we've got, 7.26% increase in water rate, and that's just water. We'll have to have a corresponding increase in our sewer rates as well to cover that side of it. And then I really have some concerns. I know we go back to this big spreadsheet, and we talked about it a little bit last time, and Kristen, you could probably explain it to me. Somehow we're borrowing money from our reserves to make our debt coverage ratio even at 1.0 for the first 5 years. It just seems like and I know that you said that we're reducing our reserve requirement to ourselves so that we can cover the debt service. It just seems like we're getting over our heads in debt by a lot of the statements that were said. I mean, to me, and I'm not saying this happened, but it seems like we went out and got the financing and now we're trying to fill the project backwards. I think we're doing it backward. I mean, are we just trying to find enough project to fill the financing that we got as a gift? Or maybe not, but it just looks like we're getting over our heads. And we've seen this happen before with parking garage. You know that I don't like looking at feasibilities and future things because, things can happen. We had the market crash with real estate in 2007. We lost TIF value. Now we're subsidizing the parking garage. We're also, I know that I think this was the best investment we've made, but some people weren't happy about the TIF supporting the city hall, which is gonna be paid off, or is paid off now, I think. Yeah. And it just looks like, I guess explain to me how we're borrowing from our cash reserves just to make the debt payments, to make it look like we can make the payments at 1.0 debt coverage ratio.
It's about
That's
timing.
Not a good look for Standard & Poor's either.
I understand what you're saying, and it's a lot of debt, and it does make me nervous as well. When I pulled together the numbers, the pink area in the middle is what you're referring to, which
Correct.
is the transfers from funds on hand. And it went down quite a bit from what I originally thought. So that first year, column N, is year 2028. It's 321,000. And then it goes across and 1.3, so about 3 million-ish or so over that 5-year span. And what we're doing there is we have a debt service reserve fund. Right now, there's about $3 to $4 million in that fund. We put aside the debt for the next year's bond payments so that we always have enough to pay. If everything came to a screeching halt, we could pay for a full year before we get ourselves into real trouble with our debt in the sewer and water fund. So what this is saying is, in those years, we'd set aside that money, or that we'd set aside leading up to those years, and those years we would pull it back out of that debt service reserve fund. In other words, we would contribute the same amount each year, but on certain years, we would pull from it. That 321,000 is transferring in from that debt service reserve. A lot of organizations don't have that. we're kind of rare in that because we always have to explain it to Standard & Poor's. Oh, we have this debt service fund. You know, this is where we keep our reserves. We also have a capital project reserve. So those funds are not shown here, and each of those funds is projected to have 2 million or so at the end of this fiscal year, if I remember correctly. I haven't looked lately, but we were contributing quite a bit this year. We were anticipating needing those funds. So if an unexpected thing, like you mentioned, happens, some of the usage, the billable flow drops off, or a big project comes at the water plant, which we did not anticipate. Those funds are set aside to help buffer that. It won't take care of the whole thing. Unexpected things will still, if they happen, will still cause us to have to take another look at everything and reconfigure. So I'm not saying it won't happen that the water customers would get a larger than 3% rate increase, but we don't anticipate. This is a conservative approach, which we always like to take.
Are those reserve funds bond covenants, or are those self-directed?
Self-directed. It depends which ones. If you're talking about these transfers from funds on hand, those are self-directed. The debt service funds for the bond, they're not required. It's a,
With the state?
yeah. So it's a lot, and I know it's a lot, and and that's why last year at this time, or last year when we were considering that, I was kind of like, I just don't know if we can afford it. Those were my statements. It would be very difficult for us to afford it without SRF funding and SRF support. However, these are very generous opportunities for the city. It would be very rare for a municipality like ours to say no to that kind of funding. It's a generous funding package, and with the long maturities, that has not been considered. The 40-year amortization hasn't been considered in here. So positive things will happen as well that may make this look like what we expect it to be is the worst case scenario.
So in 5 years, we'll be pulling $3 million out of the bond reserves. What is the balance of the bond reserves today?
I believe, well, I had estimated by the end of this current fiscal year, the balance would be 2 million in, the bond reserves. 3.5 million, I think it's around that number. It may be a little bit lower than that right now because
And
our
what-
principal payments, most
How
of
much are
them
we
are
funding in the bond reserve annually?
around 4 million. I don't have an exact number, but
We put 4 million in reserve, and we have 2 million in reserve now?
yeah, we just paid October.
So that's what we're using for our bond payments, then?
Yes,
Oh, so it's not a reserve, so to say?
it's debt service reserves.
Okay.
They are set aside in segregated accounts. The capital reserves are separate funds. Sewer has one and water has one. And those, I don't have the balance at the offhand, but those are the ones I was referring to when I said a capital reserve. Those ones we expected to have 2 million at the end of the year, this year.
And how much do we have in replacement reserves and other funds for the system?
Are those the ones I just mentioned, the capital reserves?
No, not bond reserves, but I'm talking about for repairs and maintenance that.
The capital
happen.
reserves are what you're talking about.
capital.
I think they were gonna be 2 million each.
Okay.
That's rough numbers, and I can follow up with exact, because we all went over that at budget time. They're in a document, if we look up the city budget. Each of those 2 capital reserve funds are in the budgeted with their fund balance.
Okay. I'm torn.
And again,
I know there's unnecessary improvements, but this just, please,
I'm sorry.
put me out of my misery.
Was Dave waving his hand?
No, just one thing. So, you were talking about the projects, okay? So all the projects have you know, we had to put together a project plan for both funding mechanisms. We had to go through rigorous approval through Eagle for both of them. So, I mean, the CWSRF, we were number 2 in the state this year. That's how bad our need is, okay, for doing these projects. The DWSRF, we're in the middle of the first page, which for drinking water is like phenomenal. So, you know, so the projects that we're doing are ones that we need to do, and
I get it.
you get it.
And in a perfect world, Eagle would have us do $500 million worth of projects, but it comes down to this, which is political will to raise rates,
And grants,
period.
and if they were grants, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, exactly, but we have to have the political will to do the project, and will the users be able to pay the water bill?
And that's, I mean,
So,
you know, big picture wise, like I said, we're not replacing things that aren't used or beat up. I mean, these are old components, it's old infrastructure, it needs to be replaced. But yeah, there's a risk to some of this stuff. But I mean, one way or another, to a certain extent, one way or another, some of these projects are gonna have to be done. As we wait and defer them to the next years, the costs are only gonna go up. I mean, and I don't wanna say inflation, but just the costs of the parts, the labor, mobilization, all that stuff, it's going to increase year after year. I mean, especially in the wastewater treatment plant, there's nothing in that wastewater treatment plant that has decreased in price. Everything always goes up.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
And don't forget too, at that last meeting that this was discussed, I had asked about what happens if we don't do some of this and some of these catastrophic failures start happening and the impact that would have. And I would argue that puts us in a worse position than, you know, the uncomfortableness or risk we might be taking now on this, which long-term is only gonna help.
And, you know, one thing that we've always tried to avoid, and one thing that I've always tried to avoid, is that headline that manager recommends and commission approves 20, 30, 40% increases, right? I mean, we've done well in the last few years at increasing it and managing our rates to be able to accomplish the projects we've done. I think with the proposal that we have, we're still able to accomplish that. I qualify it with, there are a lot of assumptions. You never know what's gonna happen. But it still fits within kind of our general guidelines of, we're trying to manage them. It's not as it's proposed and anticipated, we're not looking at a huge increase in terms of that one-time upfront. I mean, the worst thing we wanna do is try to put the commission into a position where it's gonna be a 20, 30, 40% rate increase, because we weren't planning these things out a little bit further.
So, put my mind at ease, what happens, this is 40-year bond financing, you said, Kristen?
This is 30. We just learned that there is an option for 40, not on these ones, but possibly future, where it was 40 an option. I think I took a phone call at that point.
So without hiking the rates a lot and something happens to the water plant, what do? Where are we? We've got a $107 million project, and I know that 17 and a half plus 3 is grant, so we got 80-some million dollars in debt. Where do we go if we have a $10 million improvement to the water plant or something? Our source goes out, I don't know, it just seems like we're putting a lot of money just in the wastewater plant and not, we've got so many broken facilities within the city, it just seems like we're putting all our
And
money into one.
before
And I
Chris
know
answers
that
that,
the financing is,
before Chris answers
Sure.
the question, the water treatment plant, now again, everything I'm gonna say, you can caveat with, you never know, right? You never know. Meteor falls in the wastewater treatment plant, we're gonna have a problem. But in terms of the actual 2 plants that we have, the water filtration plant and the wastewater treatment plant, the water treatment plant was built in the early 90s, maybe 90. But that has been better managed over the time leading up to today than what the wastewater treatment plant had been. So, you know, even with the new director, two's in the area. We've been replacing those components as they come up. There's really not a major anticipated need outside of something catastrophic. The water treatment plant has been properly managed, properly taken care of, and Kirk's done a good job at managing those things since he's been here as well. And it goes before Kirk too, but we've stayed on top of those things. It's the wastewater treatment plant where we really haven't followed through on a lot of those things. For whatever reason, out of sight, out of mind, I flush it, it goes away. That was kind of the mentality with the wastewater treatment plant. But, you know, we have more concerns about the infrastructure on the collection and distribution system than what we would with the water, what's the F word? Filtration plant.
I
You know,
think that we might want to talk at goal setting about a disaster plan. That is something that we could designate funds toward each year. It may seem small if you're putting away even 500,000 a year, but it'll be there if something is an emergency. And that is recommended. That's best practice. I mean, we've all heard the stories. We've been working on a capital planning, a bigger capital planning project, more than the 6-year CIP, but the longer
asset
term
management, yeah,
asset management.
yeah.
And so we're going places with that. I think it's in its infancy right now, but that is something that you'll be hearing more about. And so I wouldn't say it's not something we haven't thought of.
Yeah, no, I get that stuff, and that's kind of what the general fund's for, but this year we had to draw 1.4 million or 7 million for Carbide, and we had to pull $500,000 from Meridian, so other projects do happen, and we have to pull from resources that we have. And if we have these projects and they aren't, you know, what if we have to pull from those others? So just, if we said no, and we lost this fantastic funding, what's the plan? Where do we go?
I mean, if we turn down the funding and we're not looking to borrow anymore, we start just using whatever cash we have available every year through the rate and budgeting process, and we take small bites out of the project. But the age of the equipment, so for example, what do we normally have, like $1 million or $2 million available in capital projects that we do? Yeah, about $1 million, $2 million. You know, just to use one of the ones, the $34 million, it's gonna take us 34 years to get some of those things done. And there's not a lot of components within that plant can last another 34 years.
Do our permits get denied? Do we get put into non-compliance? Do we?
So the worst, I'm sorry, Scotty. Okay, okay, so I'm answering your question. I'm not trying to threaten or scare you when I say this. It makes
Right.
me really nervous to say this. Worst case scenario, we will always have an NPDES permit. We have to by law to operate and discharge in plant. Worst case scenario, we don't do these things, they will require us to do these things in these permits. Take that a step further out into even worse territory, they give us a consent order, and then we absolutely have to do them. As long as they're in the NPDES, we can buy some time, like the CSO projects we've been doing. That's been our NPDES permit this whole time. There was a due date of, I think, 2021 that they were supposed to be done. Staff changed, we worked with Eagle, they understood, and as long as we were taking incremental steps to move forward, they kind of kept it out of that, like, holy crap, real bad stuff scenarios. But,
And that's been a 30-year or 40-year project.
correct,
Yeah.
on the collection side of things, yes. But again, I mean, not all these things we can do with cash. It's a lot of money, we'd have to break that up over the cash amount, but there's, not all of the plant can last another 34 years. I mean, at a certain point, either through Eagle, they'll come down and say you have to do something, or we may be planning out 10, 15 years, but it's gonna happen in 5 or 6 years.
But we're putting 35 million into the plant, so
Oh, I know, but I was
I
assuming,
know, but
I was
and I know
answering,
you're talking about collection and everything else, but
well, I was,
as far as the plan, I mean, how far is this 35 million gonna take us?
Technically, we're putting 23 million into the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay, and then Peck and Meridian.
I'm sorry, I
or
don't wanna-
Peck and
But
Eureka, thanks.
the original bid from Myron was 27 million and 35 million with the 4 alternates. We cut an additional 3.8 million to get it down to the 23.9 million, so we didn't have to come to you for further funding last year. So at the end of the day, we're 11.5 million behind already. And that's unfortunate, we only got one bid. But that's just where the numbers are.
All right, anybody else? Commissioner Booth.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When you look at this, and right now we have a 10-year projection, we talk about things like worst case, but I honestly think there's even less than worst case. You know, a population which has decreased, you know, since 2010, 5.7%, and we're in the middle of a project which clearly has increased people using water in our community, which will decrease within 10 years. How does that, I mean, is that something that was weighed in to this? I mean, when you're looking at 40-year debt payoff, you know, clearly there are additional, there will be less users within 10 years or so on that water system. So I'm just wondering if that was considered as well within these numbers.
I mean, when we make the assumptions and do the analysis, we can only work off of what we know. Population could turn around in that same time period too and go upwards. So I mean, to really get that far out and to extrapolate a whole lot of different what-if scenarios, what if we have a big boom? What if we have a big, you know, what if we have a major employer who closes their doors? I mean, those are all risks that we have to take into consideration, but we kind of have to plan where we're at now too. I mean, you know, to a certain extent, even if you stayed status quo, did nothing, and just stayed where you're at, those events will still have an impact to the rates. I mean, if you did nothing and we had a major employer leave, you know, you're gonna have that increase to get the rates. When I was in Vassar, there was a foundry, big foundry, 200, 300 employees, something like that. And when that shuttered out, they had to raise the rates 20 to 30%. I don't remember exactly what it was. But then the plan always was, well, once we get another big employer like that too, we'll decrease it. There's no such thing as that anymore. So I mean, you try to plan, you try to manage with the information you have, and try to trend out to forecast those things, but you can't plan for everything. And to a certain extent, I would say you can't necessarily be locked up on something like that either. Population go up or down, major employer come in, major employer can go out. We just do what we can with the best information that we have.
Can I add to that?
Yeah.
Yeah, we do the best we can, but we do have 30 years of water history, billable flow, and we've dropped off an average of about 3% per year. We've used that in our statistics. Even though we dropped off more in population recently, we did not see that because at the same time as we were dropping off in population, we had the meter change out, which I think they kind of offset each other a little bit. It's a blip, yes, but in the long term, we have some pretty good historical numbers. So the other thing I wanted to add, if you don't mind, is I have numbers I pulled up from our approved budget. We're projecting in the sewer capital reserve, so that's not debt service, that's a separate fund. We projected 2.5 million at the end of this current fiscal year, and next year was gonna be, if not spent on something, 3.8 million. So this was money set aside for eventualities that we're not anticipating will happen, but this was also to put out, to contribute while we wait for reimbursement. to the projects, okay? So we buffered those with some transfers in. The Water Capital Reserve Fund, which is 586, had a estimated fund balance at 2.0 million at the end of 2025 and 3.1 million at the end of 2026. So while you were talking about some of the other plant stuff, I was thinking about it, the $10 million project, we would take some of those reserves and then we would figure out what we're gonna do with that 2026. Maybe if it happened in this year, we'd set aside the 2026, postpone that, defer that, and deal with the plant issue. But we'd have a good $3-4 million if we really needed it. Okay? Thanks.
Anybody else? I know I'm going on and on, but is there a plan or is there a backup plan where we could finance the most critical of the necessary improvements and reduce the 107 million to half of that or somewhere reasonable? And still have a safe and operational system?
I would say, there's a can in my mouth first. I would say if there's, like I said, if there's some concerns about the amount of borrowing, year 3 is kind of the year to look at. There may be some things we can take out, there may be some things we can put off, fund with cash. These first 2 rounds are gonna get us to a good spot, but again, there are certain things within the plant that's proposed in year 3 that could come to the end of life really soon, and we'll have to replace them out.
Correct. A lot of the year 3 stuff was digesters. 2 of them are from 1958, 2 are from 86. The lids on the 2 movable, they do not move, they no longer move. The other 2 are fixed lids, they both leak, and most of the insulation is missing from the top of them. We're only able to pump to one of them and mix and heat one of them at a time. So when you shut the other one off, it just sits there and starts to cool. Our biosolids start to degrade and we wouldn't be producing any methane, which this project would address, using that methane in the plant for heating, plant heating, cutting our costs for natural gas.
And I guess I would say that's the one thing we didn't really take into account in the assumptions. We don't really have a good idea on what it is. There could be some operational upgrades that have a cost savings to it.
Correct.
So for example, like Director Masterson was saying, year 3 has some work on the digesters. We can re-pipe that to have the methane go into the burners to warm the building, and then we can lessen our natural gas purchase from DTE.
Correct.
New pumps are gonna burn less energy, require less maintenance. So, I mean, there is some improvements that'll be made to the plant that'll lower our costs as well. But I'm not gonna sit here and tell you it's gonna be the cost of the borrowing or even come close to it. But there will be some improvements that'll lower the costs of the plant.
The first phase really addressed the first part of the plant, the lift screw that we weren't able to repair a couple years ago. We're still using the old drives on them because we can replace them, get parts, fix them ourselves still, so we kept that out. Bar screen, the amount of rags that we get, we're fighting rags all the time. Our grit removal, nothing going on in the secondary clarifier, nothing going on at the RBCs because we cut trains 1 and 2 out of the original bid. Our final clarifiers, both of them have failed in the last 2 years, where they're half of what they should be. And those are, like I said last meeting I was here, over $1 million a piece. Yes, we're getting a new chemical building, but our ferric tanks are leaking. We're adding it in the wrong place because of our RBCs are so bad that we're gonna be able to put it in the proper place and get better settling and a better bang for our buck there. Ferric is $13,000 a load for 3,500 gallons. I'm averaging $50,000 to $60,000 a year just in Ferric.
And that was the thing, we got an OSHA citation
That was
for
the
this.
chlorine.
Oh, that was chlorine, sorry. I always
And
get
we're
mixed up.
eliminating our 1-ton cylinders. There's our OSHA with our new building that we're getting. So right now, our RBCs, the biological process of the plant is at less than 50% capacity. We're meeting our numbers, we're doing a good job there, but we're also feeding chemicals before them to lighten the load on them. We have every RBC that can run running. But there's so much media missing off of them that, yes, we have 12 of 16 running, but with the pieces of pie on them, we're less than 50%.
All right, so I guess my last question, I'm just, didn't understand it, I guess maybe, but I shouldn't even say that publicly, but, so we started with a contract with Donahue for $35,000 to kind of start a plan, and then we expanded the contract with Donahue, and then we started planning and working on the application process, and we got, I guess, I didn't know we were going past the 35 million when we did the 35 million. I had no idea we were getting into a $107 million project. And I just think it has, I just can't even fathom the size of it. Myself, personally, I don't want to deny it, but I'm not ready to vote yes on it either. And I know we're delaying the inevitable, but I don't know where the rest of the commission is, but I just, there are still too many gaping holes for me. And how we started a $35 million sewer plant project, and I understand that we couldn't do the entire project because of the bids, but now we end up at $107 million just in the wastewater. And when I know we have talked in the past about, and the water supply on Riverside, sorry. I just, I don't know. I can't wrap my head around it yet, I guess. Commissioner Marble?
I have to agree with Mr. Mayor. That's quite a bit of money, and I'm just not prepared to say yes yet. That's just how I feel. I'm sorry.
Commissioner Rubenstein?
I guess I'll take the different approach. I think this is probably as comfortable as we'll ever feel on this, and I just keep going back to, I think long-term, we're putting ourselves in a lot worse spot and potentially risking a lot more by not doing a lot of this. And again, with phase 3, we still can cut back some of it or adjust some things, so there's still a little bit that can be done, but I think with what was presented, we have enough info that we can and should move forward.
Okay. Commissioner Bosses-Rath?
I'll chime in. I like how Brian was explaining the things that you're doing and what's not working. It's not nice, but it's good to hear just how bad everything is in a way that it's working, certain things are functioning, but I'm with Commissioner Rubenstein in a way of, I don't know how long this is gonna last before something really big and really expensive to where our hands are tied and now we have to do it and the funding's, the interest rate and all the things aren't available or we're gonna end up paying higher. So to me, I'm with you as far as, I think this is the best it's gonna get for right now. These are really old parts, and how much life do they have left in them before we're just kind of beating a dead horse?
Any other comments? This is just an informational session. Commissioner Talentino?
Thank you, Your Honor. You know, I guess looking at this, None of us like rate increases. None of us like debt. But we all unfortunately knew that this day was coming. We've got some outdated infrastructure that really needs to get taken care of. And one of my biggest concerns, yes, is the sewer treatment plant, but the Riverside issue. I mean, there's people with unprotected homes as far as I'm concerned, no fire hydrants, what have you. You know, and like I said, none of us like debt, none of us like wage increases. But how much longer can we kind of kick this can down the street? I understand where you're coming from, Mayor. It is a lot of money. That is a boatload of money. If there was an easier way, I would love to do it, but it's just to the point where I don't see there being an easier way out. You know, this is some stuff that just absolutely has to get done. And like I said, the biggest thing is, years ago when I was on the commission, we knew this day was coming. Unfortunately, we knew this day was coming, and that, you know, we tried to prepare for it. And now that it's here, we need to make a decision, one way or another, you know. But this is something that none of us like to do, but unfortunately, it's a part of our job.
Thanks. Anybody else? All right, we'll move on into the next item on the agenda, which is the meat and potatoes portion. So we'll move on into, let me get to the right meeting here. Moving now into item G, which is business items. Number 1, City Manager Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Up next for commission is a request to approve the quality-based services selection for the Eagle requirements for the CW SRF program in the selection of Donahue and Associates and the C2A team. This is kind of a follow-up item. We've done this before. This is just kind of reaffirming that. To kind of separate some of these based on where you're thinking or where you're going, this one is just approving the QBS results. So a yes, all it's saying is Donahue and Associates and C2AE is our team on this. This does not approve the contracts. The contracts are in future items. This is just receipt of those results. So just, there's no fiscal impact, there's no contracts. You are just approving the results of the QBS that selected Donahue and C2AE.
All right, any questions for the city manager on this one? So again, it's just to approve the, no fiscal impact, just to approve the results of the QBS. Is there a motion to approve Commissioner Boss's wrath?
Motion to approve results of QBS per Eagle requirements for professional services to Donahue and Associates C2AE team.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any questions or comments? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion did pass on a unanimous basis. Under G, business items, number 2, City Manager Chapman.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Up next for commission consideration is a request to more or less move forward with the DWSRF. There are 2 motions in this item. Motion to approve the design and construction engineering services with OHM for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, and a motion to establish a budget and approve the documents to move forward with it. So this one is just DWSRF. This is the borrowing that will pay for the Riverside, the intake protection, the lead and copper removal, a couple of the looping projects, and the relining under the 7 bridges here. So this is just DWSRF.
Okay, any questions on that one for the city manager? Is there a motion to approve that one? Commissioner Rumstein.
Motion to approve design and construction engineering services to OHM Advisors for the Drinking Water State Revolving Fund, water system improvement projects in the amount of $2,490,180 to move forward with the potential fiscal year 25 project and allow city manager to sign.
Support.
So it has been moved and supported. Are there any questions or comments on this one? Commissioner Habusta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You mentioned, Mr. City Manager, you mentioned the possibility of not moving forward with it down the road, even if we approve today. So if we approve today the design implement, item number 1 of this recommended action and not number 2, down the road, we could still approve number 2, or?
No, that's not what I was saying. I was saying the third year borrowing. So we
Okay.
presented 3 years. Last year, what we did and what's been approved. This year, currently what we're approving and what would be a year 3. Year 3, you can change. We can do something different. We can look at something different. This is kind of where we're at with this one. So this is what we're proposing as the borrowing for this year for the DWSRF. So when I said change things, it was more related to year 3.
Okay, thank you.
And just one other question. So this is the portion attributed to the water projects. So this one could be separate from sewer as far as one could go and one couldn't.
Yeah, technically,
Okay.
yes. One could go and, in theory, one could go and one couldn't, yes.
Okay. So we have motion and support. Any other questions, comments? Could we have a roll call, please, on the next 2 votes, 3 votes, I guess?
Mayor Gary,
Yes.
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Vasquez Rath,
Yes.
Commissioner Habusta,
No.
Commissioner Marble,
Yes.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Talentino.
Yes.
Commissioner Rubenstein, did you want to do number 2 also?
Motion to establish a budget for the 2025 DWSRF project in the amount of $16,885,000, $13,508,000 funded with an SRF loan, $2,128,000 in loan principal forgiveness, and $1,249,000 grant as presented with advances from the Water Capital Reserve up to bonding in 2025 and allow the city manager to sign Eagle's milestone schedule to establish the project.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any other questions or comments? Roll call, please.
Mayor Gary,
Yes.
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Vasquez Rath,
Yes.
Commissioner Habusta,
No.
Commissioner Marble,
Yes.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Talentino.
Yes.
Motion passed on a 6-1 basis, both motions. Under G, business items, number 3, City Manager Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Up next for commission consideration is a request to move forward on the CWSRF side of things. This is the wastewater treatment plant, the collection system. 2 motions here. Motion to approve the amendment with Donahue to move forward with construction services, as well as a second motion to establish a budget for the CWRF project and sign any necessary Eagle documentation. And again, this, I guess we're talking about what we're proposing in the future. This is only for this current proposal. This does not automatically do something for next year or anything in that way. I guess if there was direction or conversation, either tonight or at a later time for year 3, we'd be happy to entertain that. But this is just for the proposal for this current year, not year 3.
Commissioner Rubenstein.
And I know it's here, but just to clarify, there's about $3 million in forgiveness on this that would go away if we voted no, correct?
Yes, no. You went in both directions, I'm sorry.
It would go away if we vote no.
Yes, tonight, if we didn't take advantage of this, the principal forgiveness would go away. The way SRF projects work, the next one in the queue for the funding would essentially take the funding.
Commissioner Habusta.
can I just ask for a clarification on that? So, every year, is there a set schedule of state revolving fund dollars that go? So in other words, if we didn't take advantage of this year, could we apply for it again next year and receive funding?
So, yes, so there's and if you remember, this conversation happened around last year, around the same time. So there is a schedule, there is a process. Yes, you could. The dollar amount may change in terms of what we'd be eligible for. It wouldn't be necessarily, I can't guarantee you, tell you it's gonna be a 1-for-1, whatever we requested this year and was approved for is automatically gonna be there for next year. Like I said, one of the bigger caveats is that the principal forgiveness, we didn't anticipate it this year, we're getting it this year. I am promising you the principal will not be there next year. Nobody is anticipating that. So with the SRF programs, once you're in, I think you're in for 3 years, essentially. So you could defer it and move on to next year, but again, I'm not promising that. We will still have to go through the application process. We will still have to be scored. There may be other communities that come up that are going for it next year that may score higher for us and bump us back down to either not be eligible or receive a reduced amount. So, I mean, that's the risk on this one particular one. We have the opportunity to do it next year, but I can't guarantee dollar for dollar, apple to apples next year.
Any other questions or comments? I'll just make one comment. This is part of the project that I just am I'm struggling with, and I want you to know that I voted yes on the last one because it does impact water supply, water main, the looping, our raw water intake, and some of the other areas, so. So I'm not trying to be contrary to that vote, but I'm not going to support this one, so. Who wants to make a motion on this one? Okay. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Motion to approve an amendment with Donahue and Associates and their subconsultants, design and construction services, and collection system consultant and subconsultants, design and construction services to be determined. Establish the budget amount of $3,521,350 for professional services to move forward with the potential fiscal year 25 project and allow city manager to sign the amendments and contracts.
Is there
Support.
Has been moved and supported. Any questions or comments? Could we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Gary,
No.
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Baspis Rath,
Yes.
Commissioner Habusta,
No.
Commissioner Marble,
No.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Talentino.
Yes.
Okay, motion did pass on a 4-3 vote. Thank you very much. Commissioner Rubenstein.
Motion to establish a budget for the 2025 CWSRF project in the amount of $28,221,350, $25,080,000 funded with an SRF loan, and $3,420,000 in loan principal forgiveness as presented with advances from the sewer capital reserve up to bonding in 2025, and allow the city manager to sign Eagle's milestone schedule to establish the project.
Support.
So there's been a motion and support. Any questions or comments? Could we have a roll call, please?
Mayor Gary,
No.
Commissioner Bauer,
Yes.
Commissioner Baspis Rath,
Yes.
Commissioner Habusta,
No.
Commissioner Marble,
No.
Commissioner Rubenstein,
Yes.
Commissioner Talentino.
Yes.
And motion passes on a 4-3 vote. Thank you very much. All right, moving on into G, business items, number 4, City Manager Chapman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Up next for commission consideration is a request to approve a PSAA grant application, authorize the execution of it, and to approve a budget amendment. So this item here is the Public Safety Academy Assistance Grant. This was something we took advantage of about a year ago. We put two Two. We put 2 recruits through the police academy. When they got done, we hired them. This is another opportunity. We have 1 person lined up to take advantage of these fundings. The contribution from MCOs in the state has decreased slightly. Last year, we were able to send both of those individuals through the academy and come on board with no cost to us. But this year, the contributions have gone down a little bit, so there is a budget request of about 5,800, I believe, 5,100, that we would look to make from the general fund. So 2 motions on this one: motion to approve the PSA grant application, and motion to approve the budget amendment as presented.
Thank you very much. Anybody have any questions on this item for city manager or chief of police? Mr. Bauer, you're giving me the eyeball.
So moved, we approve the PSAA grant application as presented and authorize the chief to sign any necessary documents.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any questions, comments? All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passed unanimously. Commissioner Bauer.
I further move to approve the budget amendments as presented.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any questions or comments? All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion also passed unanimously. Thank you. Item H, city manager announcements and updates is a blank.
It's a blank. I have nothing. Just with the holidays coming up, I will be out of the office at some point next week for the holidays, and some of the following week, once my wife tells me what days I have to take off. I will let you all know what my schedule is. So other than that, I don't have anything else right now.
All right. Moving on into item I, which is matters presented by the public. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to make any comments at this time? Certainly, sure. If you could come up to the microphone, please, and state your name for the.
My name is Jean McCullough, and I'm not a resident of the city, but I came to observe tonight. And I know a lot of you folks are relatively new on the commission, okay? But in sitting here listening, you guys are between a rock and a hard place on that wastewater treatment plant after listening to your department heads. So I guess my question is, does the city have a long-term plan on how to maintain their infrastructure and wastewater, all of that? Why did you let it get this bad? That's my observation of tonight. Thank you very much for letting me say that.
Sure.
Good luck.
Thanks for coming to the meeting.
I'll be back.
I don't know if you want to.
Comment?
Yeah, it'd be nice. I mean, it's.
So I mean, my comment is gonna be very general,
Sure.
obviously. I've only been here 5 years. I can't speak too much of what happened before I got here, but, you know, the world that we operate in, especially when it comes to infrastructure, I mean, our city has a lot of infrastructure. We've got 2 treatment plants, 100 miles of main, water-wise and sanitary-wise. Collection system has 7 lift stations, 9 lift stations, even worse. 9 lift stations, 5,000 meters, 900 fire hydrants, Kirk? Give or take 1 or 2, maybe somewhere around there. I mean, our city is no different from any other city. We are very built out. We have a lot of infrastructure. Regardless of how well you plan, and again, planning for something like this would have had to happen in '85 after they completed those plans. And I can't speak to what was going on then. I wasn't even born yet. But you can't plan for that stuff. Part of the city's problem, or part of the city's challenge that they had, from what I understand, as they were planning for those things, there's always these wrenches that come down at us. So late 80s, early 90s, EPA came out with an order that said you can no longer have sanitary and stormwater mixing together. You are now on the hook to separate hundreds of years of infrastructure that was built that way throughout the city. So that's an unanticipated increase that you didn't see coming. The way utilities were built out prior to the eighties, going back in the seventies and sixties, there used to be three pots of money. There was the rates that the utility customers paid. There was funding contributions from the state in terms of grants. And then there was a lot more funding contributions from the federal government that came down to actually build out these systems. As things got tighter across the board, the Fed stopped giving out their contributions, the states kind of reeled in their contributions. So you have an infrastructure system that was built out on three big pots of money, but today you only have one pot of money. And it's not like a business where if we shutter or we lose revenue, I'm just not going to do Lake Shore side of the roads anymore. They're on their own. We're gonna cut them off. We can't do those utilities anymore. You gotta spread it out. So the way that we were built out isn't the same as the way we are today in terms of revenue, but the age of
Don't start over.
I don't even know where I was at now. But in short, the world that we're in today is not the same as we were 30 years ago after we did the first plant upgrade. It was not the same 30 years prior to that when we built the wastewater treatment plant. I'm gonna mic drop.
In even shorter, governments are terrible at asset management. And it's just become in the last 20 years maybe that I think there's been more of a focus on it, so.
And I mean, to Kristen's point, she brought it up during the conversation too. The staff is trying to get better. If you look at the department heads that we have across the board, we have 10 right now, and only 3 of them have been here longer than the last 4 or 5 years. So we've got new people in the utilities, new people in engineering, police department, fire department, all that stuff. We got all these new people here. So we're trying to get better at managing what we have, our assets, whether it be building, road, sidewalk, green space, laptops, whatever the case may be. We're trying to manage them better. But at the end of the day, that only goes so far because you only have so much money too. So I mean, and I think somebody was starting to say something about taxes, and I get off my soapbox here soon, but I mean, this stuff just doesn't carry us as far as what it used to anymore, so.
Thank you for your question. Item J is matters presented by the city commission. Commissioners. Commissioner Habusta.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had an opportunity to attend an Eagles game this past weekend, and there was concern raised about the Hood project, and so I'm just wondering if you could provide an update on that. Clearly, we'd all like to see that finish as soon as possible. We're halfway through a season almost right now, and I know we're not there yet, so I'm just wondering, just kind of holdups and when we would be looking at that project being closed out.
The only holdup we have right now is just the state inspector. Everything's in, everything's done, everything works. We just need the inspector to come in, actually do the inspection, sign off on it. Up until recently, it was kind of communicated to us that they'd be up here, ready to go, kind of where we're at. But for whatever reason, it's just taking a little bit longer for the inspector to get in there. So as soon as the inspector gets done, the thing's signed off, it's fired up, and we're ready to go.
So we don't have a time frame as far as when the state inspector might be coming up?
It's up to them right now. I mean, we've asked them, Tyler's called them last week, this week, the week before that. It's out of our hands. Once the inspector is committed, they come up, they inspect it, they sign off on it, they can do it. But the challenge is, I believe it's a mechanical inspector. There's only one that covers the entire UP. So we're at the mercy of that inspector. We've been on them. We are on them. We're doing everything we can, but the project is done. It's ready to go. As soon as we get that inspection, it's up and running.
So you're saying the project's fully complete inside out? And the reason why I ask, quite frankly, is there's some sort of cover over the vent outside, and
in terms of it being workable and turned on and cooking French fries, what needs to be done is done. So there is a component that's a cover for a vent or exhaust or something like that. That is not a requirement for the fryers and the hood to be turned on. So in terms of getting that thing turned on, everything required is done. We just need the inspector.
Anybody else? And I think Commissioner Bospas-Rath reminded us that city manager might have another schedule announcement, and I would do it, but I don't know the times. Isn't there a children's job too?
I was hoping you'd say dates. I don't know the dates. So, yep, the anchor drop this year is happening. That's December 31st. There will be an 8 o'clock, 8 o'clock children's ball drop, or people that can't stay up that late, and then a midnight anchor drop. The CVB is kind of working with some of the volunteers to organize that. The fire department is coordinating the truck, I believe, from Alta, not the makeup store, and they'll be the ones coordinating the anchor drop. So that is 8 o'clock New Year's Eve and midnight New Year's Eve, first thing in the morning.
And our next meeting is on January 6th, I believe. So on behalf of the city commission and the city, certainly Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to everybody.
And happy Hanukkah.
And Happy Hanukkah.
Which starts, which starts on
Commissioner
Christmas Day this
Rubenstein?
year.
Yeah. Commissioner Bauer.
Your Honor, I move that we adjourn this meeting.
Support.
Moving is supported. All in favor, say aye that we adjourn.